So, imagine you are trapped in this cycle of escalating physical abuse.
Right. Yeah. That's a horrific scenario.
But the primary thing keeping you from calling for help, well, it isn't just the person hurting you. It's actually the university you attend.
Wow.
Yeah. You realize that if you report the violence, the institution's own moral rules will be, weaponized against you. They'll expel you, destroy your scholarship, and just publicly humiliate your family.
It's a terrifying paradox, honestly. The very systems that are built to protect us often require us to be absolutely perfect to actually earn that protection.
Exactly.
And predators, well, they know exactly how to exploit that gap. They don't just use physical force. They use the institution's own rule book as a lock and key.
Welcome to today's deep dive. Today we are unpacking the harrowing, incredibly complex, and ultimately redemptive true story detailed in Mayci Neeley's memoir, Told You So.
It is quite the read.
It really is. We're looking at how extreme institutional rules can be weaponized against the vulnerable. We'll explore the sheer psychological whiplash of compounded trauma and, how a person rebuilds when their carefully constructed life plan is just completely destroyed.
The narrative arc we're exploring today is, it's genuinely staggering. We are looking at a blue-chip Division I tennis recruit from a really strict, affluent Mormon background.
Right.
And she finds herself trapped in this vicious cycle of abuse, which eventually leads to an unexpected pregnancy, a catastrophic betrayal, and then, in a twist that honestly defies belief, she loses the father of her child in a horrific accident mere hours later.
And I want to emphasize right at the top here. We aren't just summarizing a memoir today. We are breaking down like a masterclass in human survival. We're going to look at the underlying mechanics of how systems fail young people by policing them rather than equipping them.
Yeah, that distinction right there between policing behavior and equipping a young mind, that is really the foundation of everything that happens to Mayci.
Exactly. So to understand how someone gets trapped in that kind of institutional paradox, we have to look at the environment that shaped her.
For sure.
So Mayci grew up in Coto de Caza. It's a very wealthy, gated community in Southern California. And by her own admission, she was a total goody two-shoes.
She never broke the rules.
Never. She played fiercely competitive tennis, which eventually led to her being recruited to play at Brigham Young University, BYU. And get this, her older sister Lauren was actually the head coach there.
Oh, wow. So there's a massive intersection of pressures here. On one side, you have the elite athletic expectations where, absolute obedience to the coach is paramount.
Right. And it's your sister.
Exactly. But layered directly on top of that is her strict Mormon upbringing. In that environment, rules are heavily emphasized and very black and white.
Yeah.
There's an intense community-wide expectation to save oneself from marriage, plus a deeply ingrained fear of judgment surrounding any kind of rule breaking.
Which sounds like it would create someone who is hyper-aware of their boundaries, but in reality, it created extreme naivete.
Totally.
There is a moment in the source material that perfectly illustrates this. She's a teenager, and she's making out with a guy for the first time. And she has a normal physical reaction. She gets wet.
Okay.
And she is genuinely terrified. She thinks she's dying or bleeding out because she had received absolutely zero basic sex education.
Right. And she knows the strict behavioral rules, right? Chastity, modesty, and the word of wisdom.
Which is the health code that prohibits things like coffee or tea.
Yeah, exactly. She knows she can't have tea, but she doesn't know her own basic biology. The what not to do is drilled into her daily, but the why and the how are just completely absent.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because trying to navigate a college environment without that basic education, it's like sending someone to navigate a literal minefield, but instead of giving them a map, you just hand them a list of things not to do without explaining why.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. But I'm actually struggling with this a bit. These high control environments and honor codes are theoretically designed to keep bad actors out. So how does this complete lack of education actually set the stage for predators to operate inside the bubble?
Well, what's fascinating here is that this is the critical blind spot of high control groups. When rules are presented as purely black and white edicts without the underlying why, a young person fails to develop the critical thinking tools needed to understand boundaries and consent.
Oh, I see.
They are taught total obedience to authority, not bodily autonomy. They learn to externalize their moral compass. So when someone intentionally crosses a physical line with them, the victim doesn't have the internal framework to say, this is wrong and I have the right to stop it.
They just feel the overwhelming shame of the rule being broken.
Precisely. They feel complicit, which makes them highly vulnerable to manipulation. The predator essentially steps into the role of the authority figure who now holds their shameful secret.
Wow. And that exact combination, naivete, a lack of internal boundaries, and the absolute terror of institutional punishment, it creates the perfect storm when Mayci arrives at college.
It really does.
She meets a fellow student the book refers to as Dick. He comes from a wealthy family, he's handsome, they're set up together, but very quickly he reveals himself to be intensely manipulative and wildly jealous.
The escalation here is just rapid and severe. That jealousy quickly morphs into terrifying physical violence.
Yeah, it's really hard to read.
He chokes her, he cuts her thigh with a razor blade, and in one calculated instance, he intentionally slams a door on her Achilles heel.
Which nearly ruins her entire tennis season.
Exactly. It's designed to physically break down her independence and isolate her.
And it escalates to coercion and sexual assault. Dick drugs her with prescription pills and alcohol, and he takes her virginity entirely against her will.
Odd.
But this is where the institutional trap we talked about earlier just snaps shut. Dick intentionally takes photos and videos of her. He documents her drinking, smoking a THC pen, and engaging in sexual acts.
And he uses those photos to guarantee her absolute silence. Because at the time, this was in 2013, BYU completely lacked an amnesty policy for victims of sexual assault.
Let's pause and clarify that for a second, because it's so important. For those who might not know, an amnesty policy guarantees that if you report an assault, the university won't punish you for minor rule breaking you were doing at the time of the attack.
Like underage drinking.
Right. Or in Mayci's case, breaking the honor code. Without that policy, a predator just has to hand you a beer, snap a photo, and suddenly they hold the keys to your entire academic and social life.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is the linchpin of predator mechanics on college campuses. Abusers actively look for leverage. Here, the institution's rigid moral code freely provided that leverage.
Yeah.
Mayci faced an impossible, paralyzing choice. Report the horrific abuse and face immediate expulsion, lose her hard-earned athletic scholarship, destroy her family's pride, and potentially ruin her sister's coaching career.
Or stay silent and endure the torture. Here's where it gets really interesting. We usually think of institutional rules as a shield to protect people. But here, the shield literally became the weapon. It forces you to wonder, how often do rigid moral codes inadvertently create a safe haven for abusers?
A lot more often than we'd like to admit. It supercharges the mechanics of a trauma bond. A trauma bond occurs when cycles of severe abuse and intermittent reinforcement, like a sudden apology or a fleeting moment of affection, create a powerful chemical attachment in the brain.
Right, the hot and cold.
Yeah. The victim becomes dependent on the abuser's approval because the abuser is the only source of relief from the terror they cause. When you add institutional blackmail to that biological bond, the victim is sealed in a psychological vault. They can't go to the authorities, and they can't trust their own judgment.
So how does she get out? Because she doesn't escape by fighting the system or finally breaking the bond. She escapes her sheer dumb luck.
Yeah, it's wild.
Her abuser physically transfers out of BYU to address some mysterious stomach issues. He just packs up his Mustang and leaves.
Which brings up a fascinating psychological response. When a high-control abuser suddenly disappears, the victim's nervous system doesn't just quietly return to a baseline of normal.
It seeks out a new extreme to fill that sudden void.
Exactly. The pendulum swings completely in the opposite direction.
And for Mayci, that extreme pendulum swing arrived in the form of Arik. Arik is a baseball player, and he is the polar opposite of her abuser.
Totally different guy.
Right. Where Dick was controlling, cruel, and obsessed with her image, Arik is goofy, rebellious, and always wearing a backward hat. They immediately bond over breaking the rules together.
They sneak into apartment complex jacuzzis after hours.
They hide alcohol in insulated Swick cups to walk around campus undetected. It's wild.
To someone who just escaped a suffocating psychological vault, that reckless rebellion feels exactly like freedom. But it's an illusion.
Yeah.
They are both masking deep, unaddressed pain. Arik isn't just a carefree rebel. His life is incredibly complicated. Specifically, his ex-girlfriend is currently 8 months pregnant.
Oh man, and that complication becomes exponentially heavier because Mayci starts feeling exhausted on the tennis court. She can't catch her breath.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. She buys a CVS pregnancy test, takes it in a red Solo cup in her apartment bathroom, and sees that faint second line.
Oh!
She goes to a Christian pregnancy resource center to confirm it via a vaginal ultrasound, and she learns she is 10 weeks along.
The secret is out. And this initiates the confession phase, which is where the narrative subverts our expectations in a major way.
It really does. Because she has to confess to everyone. She has to tell her sister Lauren, who was her coach. She has to call her parents, who are absolutely furious, and immediately force her to pack up and move back home to California.
Right.
And, terrifyingly, she has to confess to BYU officials. She meets with the BYU athletic director, Tom Holmoe, and the dean of students, Vern Heppery.
Given everything we just discussed about the rigid honor code and the weaponized fear of expulsion, you would naturally expect this meeting to be the ultimate punitive hammer-dropping.
Right. You'd expect them to throw the book at her. But instead of wrath, they show astonishing compassion.
It's amazing.
They look at her and explicitly tell her, a baby is never a mistake. They actually allow her to withdraw safely so she can go through the repentance process back home, leaving the door open for her to potentially return to her scholarship later.
It's a profound structural paradox. The very institution she was terrified of, the one whose rules her abuser used to hold her hostage, ended up showing her more systemic grace in that moment than her own family initially did.
So what does this all mean? She's swinging from a cage of abuse straight into a free fall of rebellion. It's like taking off a cast before the bone is healed and immediately trying to run a marathon.
Yeah, that never works.
Right. Think about a time you try to outrun your own pain.
Right.
It usually catches up to you, right? The anxiety of the cover-up is almost always worse than the consequence itself. You'd think the story settles here into a predictable facing the consequences arc. She's home in California, she's pregnant, she's dealing with it. But within a matter of hours, the floor drops out entirely.
The sequence of events that follows is almost incomprehensible. It's an extreme study in the complexity of grief and psychological whiplash.
Mayci is banished to her childhood bedroom. Her dad, who is deeply skeptical of Arik, starts aggressively investigating him. He's trying to prove this guy is bad news. And he succeeds.
Oh, no.
Yeah. He discovers that Arik had a drunken one-night stand the very night before Mayci found out she was pregnant. The exact same night he was texting her about how much he loved her.
It is the ultimate betrayal delivered right at her absolute most vulnerable moment. I mean, she has lost her independence, her sport, her community.
Everything.
And now the one person she thought was her anchor in the chaos has completely betrayed her.
Mayci is furious. She confronts Arik over FaceTime, she breaks up with him right there on the screen, and she cruelly tells him that he will just be paying child support and that their baby is going to call someone else daddy.
Ouch.
Yeah, Arik is devastated. After the call, he sends a final pleading text. He apologizes, says he deserved better, that he'll never forgive himself, but the text ends abruptly, just the letter J, unfinished.
And the reason that text is unfinished is the tragedy that completely short-circuits her ability to process the anger.
Hours later, Mayci is sitting at a Mexican restaurant with her mom. She's scrolling Instagram to distract herself, and she sees a post that says, R.I.P. Arik.
God.
She assumes it's some terrible joke.
Yeah.
But then she sees the photos. There was a horrific accident in Spanish Fork Canyon involving a semi-truck. Arik was thrown through the windshield and died instantly.
This is killed mid-text, mid-apology.
How do you even process that kind of whiplash? You're reeling from the ultimate betrayal, your ego is crushed, and before you can even exhale your anger, you're hit with the ultimate tragedy.
This raises an important question, honestly, about the extreme complexity of grief. You really can't process it, at least not initially.
Yeah, imagine.
When grief is layered with profound betrayal, it becomes a psychological labyrinth. Mayci is instantly thrown into severe survivor's guilt, playing the agonizing what-if game. What if she hadn't yelled at him on FaceTime? What if she had forgiven him instantly?
Right.
On top of that, she is entirely robbed of closure. Reconciling intense hatred for betrayal with the devastating sorrow of a sudden death creates massive cognitive dissonance. There is just no clean way to process it.
She attends his funeral in Utah. It's an open casket viewing. Grown men are out on the lawn, literally sobbing. She stands by his casket, and she takes his scratched dog tag, which she had engraved with the Roman numerals of their relationship milestones, and places it into her pocket.
And then the funeral ends, the crowds go home, the dust settles, and she has to face the terrifying reality of what is actually left.
Which is essentially a blank slate, but a deeply painful one. Arik is gone, her tennis career is halted, Her body is rapidly changing. She is entirely alone in her sweaty childhood bedroom in Orange County, trying to figure out if she even wants to survive.
This initiates the darkest phase of the aftermath, the intense, suffocating depression. She experiences active suicidal ideation.
That's so dark.
There is a harrowing moment where she is on a family cruise ship, looking over the railing, debating jumping into the ocean. The only thing that stops her is the sudden physical feeling of her baby kicking.
Wow. And finding support is incredibly difficult, which brings us back to how inconsistently institutions operate. She goes to her local California bishop to continue her repentance process so she can eventually get her school endorsement back.
Yep.
But this bishop is the exact opposite of the grace she found with the BYU dean. He actively victim blames her for the assault. He hyperfixates on trivial rule breaking, like aggressively asking if she drank tea, and he pushes her to give the baby up for adoption, claiming she's taking scholarship money away from worthy students.
It's a stark reminder that institutions are ultimately made of individuals. The application of rigid rules can vary wildly depending on the empathy or the personal biases of the person enforcing them.
That is so true.
It forces Mayci to realize she can no longer rely on external authorities to validate her worth or manage her trauma.
I want to ask you, the listener, a question. When your entire life plan is incinerated and you're surrounded by people telling you how to feel, what you should do, and who you are, how do you find your own voice?
For Mayci, reclaiming her agency happens not in one sweeping gesture, but in small, defining moments of clarity. A massive turning point occurs in the doctor's office when she discovers she is having a boy.
Oh, right.
She completely breaks down. She and Arik were convinced it was a girl, but after he died, she just knew it was a boy. It crystallizes her resolve to be a mother on her own terms. Another shift happens when her dad hands her a blank black journal. He tells her to write it all down, the good, the bad, the ugly.
He tells her that maybe one day it'll be a book that helps someone else, and that writing sparks this tiny flame of a future. She starts to shift from being a passive victim of circumstance and of the men in her life to becoming an active creator of her future.
Yeah, she really takes control.
She takes an incredibly bold swing. She applies for the Ellen DeGeneres Mother's Day giveaway.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Desperate for resources, she goes to the studio, but she sits hiding in the top corner so nobody recognizes her on national TV, and she wins a year of baby gear. A crib, diapers, a stroller.
That practical windfall gives her something invaluable. Financial confidence. It allows her to believe she can actually raise this child alone.
Totally.
But more importantly, we see a profound evolution in her worldview. She moves away from internalizing the shame imposed by her community. She realizes that the systemic lack of resources and proper sex education is the real enemy here, not the young women who stumble while navigating those institutional blind spots.
She stops hiding. The ultimate takeaway from Mayci's journey isn't just the cliche that you can survive hard things. It's a structural insight. The systems built to protect us often require us to be perfect to earn that protection.
Right.
Mayci's survival wasn't about finally learning to follow the rules perfectly. It was about realizing the rules were flawed and giving herself the grace the institution wouldn't always guarantee.
Exactly. It's a radical act of self-reclamation. She took the blueprint that failed her, threw it away, and drew her own. The only true shame lies in hiding your mistakes. I mean, she walked through a mechanism of abuse, rigid institutional traps, betrayal, and death, and she built a new life out of the wreckage.
So we'll leave you with this lingering thought to ponder long after this deep dive ends. If our deepest traumas and our greatest sources of resilience often stem from the exact same catastrophic events, how might the worst thing that has ever happened to you actually be the exact brutal training ground for the person you're required to become?